Well, today we've had a bit of a tortuous journey to get here, David, with all sorts of problems with technology, but it's my great pleasure to welcome David Corkery. He's from County Cork, and he has played with Munster, very, very famous club, and Ireland, a team that's doing exceptionally well at the moment. He had 27 caps before injury got in the way of his career. And he's had his highs playing, including scoring a try against the All Blacks, which I think is always good to have on one's CV. He's also had his lows, but due to his strength of mind and his character and the support that he's had, he's coming through that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it is a measure of the man that I've got to know very briefly. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, we did have some technical difficulties along the way, but
we're here now. So your playing career is stellar. Cut short at 27, I believe.
Yeah.
When did you start playing rugby?
So look, I mean, I started, I suppose, young enough at the age of 6, which might be unusual in rugby terms. Like most kids would start at kind of 8 to 10. I started a bit younger. I was a bit taller. I could handle myself with the older kids than me. So I started playing rugby. I also played Gaelic football and hurling and every other sport that I could possibly do along the way. But as I got older, rugby, I suppose, kind of more or less took over. I was fortunate enough to go to a rugby playing school called CBC here in Cork. Managed to play Munster schools, Irish schools, and that really, I suppose, got my foot, myself on the run of the ladder. And that's really, I mean, I started with a club called Old Christians, again here in Cork. And then look, when you go to a rugby playing school here in Cork, of which there really are only 2 really, 2 if not 3, you don't really have an option to play any other sports. It just, it takes over your life to a certain degree. Probably took over my life too much in terms of that I neglected my academic career.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I only ever went to school to play sport. And,
Yeah.
I managed to do my dad proud in the end, I think. I know he was. But at your club, you had some pretty decent players come out of that club.
Yeah, look, Cork Constitution would be a very famous club here in Ireland, and it's an academy really for Munster and the Irish team. The late great Tommy Kiernan, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, Donal Lenihan, Ronan O'Gara, Simon Zebo, Peter O'Mahony. The list is just endless. And the next wave, it goes on and on and on. And it is, look, it's a club where you either sink or swim. If you're good enough, you'll make it. If you're not, there's no apologies given or none needed. So, look, in also saying that, Dave, it's also a very sociable club as well, and they do have teams who play at a lesser level, but certainly the senior team would be, either semi-pro, or some of them would even be playing professional with Munster, and then they'd go back to clubs when they're not picked for the Munster team. So it is it's an establishment of excellence, really, is what I would call it.
And Ireland's very similar to New Zealand in many, many respects. We have a small club just about 10, 15 minutes drive away from me. And I did a podcast with Richard Lowe the other day. You would no doubt have heard of Lowe by reputation. A great guy, actually, a great guy. Anyway, he was telling me that the Glenmark under 11s produced 4 All Blacks. And it's not
Right.
even a town, mate. You know, if you
Right.
blink,
Okay.
you're through it. It's just a place on the map. You know, it's got a church and that's just about, and a rugby ground. You know, so that's just about it. But managed to produce four All Blacks. Himself, Robbie Deans, and a couple of others. But one of the things that you know has always impressed me about Ireland is the fact that in rugby you guys punch well above your weight, and I know other countries claimed that, but those other countries, I mean, like New Zealand, for example, rugby is still the national sport, although that's under threat from a participation standpoint. But you guys, you know, you've got Gaelic football, you've got hurling, you've got football, you've got rugby, you know, and there's a huge amount of competition for players. And as anybody who's followed Ireland and Irish sport, and I have, you know, I love watching all the GAA sports, and you know, it's amazing, really.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you spoke of kind of the one horse town scenario, and like Ireland is full of those places as well. Except the only difference is we have a church and probably two pubs in those towns. But yeah, look, Gaelic football is religion here in
Yeah.
Ireland. The GAA is really the stronghold sport in this country. And as I would say, then you'd probably have heard in Gaelic football or soccer, whichever you want to call it, and then rugby would probably come there. But like yourselves, it's under threat. The participation numbers are dwindling. At underage level, we're quite strong, right up to the age of 16. But then after that, there's a massive drop off. I suppose players discover women and alcohol, and they get sense, and they decide to concentrate on their studies instead of chasing an oval ball around the place. But yeah, it is a challenge at the moment. But I suppose the one thing that the RFU got right when the game went professional was they took control of the provinces. They took control of the players. And that's the key to Ireland's success. They own the players, where in the likes of France and England, it's the clubs own the players, and the club and the unions then have to write to the clubs for players to be released. Whereas here in Ireland, we can determine how long Johnny Sexton plays, how many games he plays in per year, what his treatment is. So that has been the ultimate key to Ireland's success, is that the players are not being burnt out. They're not playing, you know, week after week after week. They're not being injected up if they get an injury to go back on the field. They're a commodity in one sense, but they're also human beings. And I think the RFU have got that path right. Whereas in our time, look, I'll openly say it, I don't have a problem saying it, that we were injected up and we were thrown back out onto the field. And there was very little regard given to our long-term physical and mental health, I suppose, to a certain degree. You know, concussion is a big word, and probably a dirty word in world rugby at the moment. It's probably a very scary a very scary name to world rugby because of litigation and what's happened in the NFL in the States. And that's why we see so many red cards, yellow cards, and rightly so. Players need to be protected. I don't think we were protected back in my era. And I think the consequences of that will, you know, I think they might damage rugby for a while. But hopefully, once all the laws are adjusted, and maybe this generation, and you know, yeah, probably the end of this generation of rugby players filters out and the next one comes through, you know, they'll be aware of what concussion is, the laws, how to deal with it. Referees can deal with it, coaches can deal with it, and I suppose the medical profession as well will have a much better understanding of it. So it's definitely a worrying time for rugby everywhere around the world, no matter it's New Zealand, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, doesn't really matter. It's worrying times for rugby on a whole.
It is. I mean, it's. I was told the other day that basketball is now a bigger participation sport in New Zealand than rugby, and you know, it is. And the parents have a big say these days. They always have, but even bigger now because of the of the way the game has evolved at the professional level, and also, I mean, I call it McDonald's rugby. Every team, no matter which town or which city, which country you play in, all try to play exactly the same way, which is essentially bash and kick. And
Yeah.
you know, it'll evolve out of that, hopefully, and we're seeing a bit of that at the moment with France and also with Ireland. And you must be particularly proud of the way Ireland's playing at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I remember our last conversation we had, I was alluding to the fact that Ireland have now beaten New Zealand 3 out of the last 4 attempts, and there's not that many countries can
Nope.
boast that. And I suppose the last time they played him, I suppose for me, was the most impressive. It's certainly the most impressive performance I've ever seen out of any Irish team. And I know there's excuses can be given. New Zealand are on the back of a very long season, and they had some injuries. But the way I would look at New Zealand rugby is that when you become an All Black, you lose the excuse to give excuses. You lose
Yep.
the right to give excuses. So, and they didn't hold back after. Like, they commended Ireland for the way they played, which is a great sign of any team, of any manager, that they were beaten. They were fairly beaten, and they knew it as well. So they'll learn from that. They'll come back stronger. But yeah, Irish rugby has changed. And look, for many years we were under the reins of Joe Smith, a New Zealand man, and he did great things for Irish rugby. But if I was to criticize him in any way, shape, or form, is that he introduced this. You call it McDonald's, I call it playing rugby by numbers.
Yeah.
The players were almost brainwashed to do certain things in certain areas of the field. And if you stood outside that box or decided to take a risk, then you were chastised and you were probably dropped for the next game. And that, to me, isn't what rugby's about. Rugby for me is taking risks, learning from them, and not doing the same thing over and over again. But without risks in rugby, what have we got? We've just got a boring, dull, as you described it, box kicking game. Kick the ball in the air and it's 50-50 when it comes down, and it's boring to watch. And I think Ireland were certainly exposed in the last World Cup. Everybody knew what they were going to do, almost down to every time they got the ball in their hand in certain areas of the field. It was so predictable and so easy to stop. And it's unfortunate, because that was a very good team. And look, we've never been to a semi-final of a World Cup, and I think we're due one now.
Oh, I'm sure in France, I've actually picked. I don't know how the draw works, but I've picked France to play Ireland in the final. Yeah, so it's interesting to see the sort of direction that Irish rugby and French rugby is currently going, and hopefully other teams. My country, for example, Australia. We used to be the kings of running rugby, and that doesn't happen anymore. And they need to do, and we need to see all these players. I mean, the Welsh, for example, just across the water from where you are. I mean, they've had all the Welshness coached out of them. And that's the one big criticism I've got at Warren Gatland. It was with him, it was bash and kick. And, the Welsh players, you go around to the clubs, the kids, they've still got this incredible ability to play, in the Welsh way. But, we want to see them go back to the Welsh way and not have it all coached out of them. And as you say, play by numbers. And
well, Dave, I just think on that, like, professionalism has brought in this whole kind of fear of losing. And if Warren Gatland or Joe Smith or whoever it might be can win 3-0, and produce the most boring and dull rugby, then they're going to do that. They're afraid of losing. They're afraid of taking chances to develop the game. Their win bonuses, their pay bonuses are depending on how many games they win. Not how much entertainment they can produce. It's win, 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 win at all costs. And if you have that attitude, then you're never going to develop.
No, and so they become very defensive, right? And I have, and the coaches have got a lot to answer for. And of course, one doesn't really blame them, I suppose, because there's big money in coaching at the top levels these days, and they need to keep their jobs and to go on to other ones, and And so, you know, it is a business, but
Yeah,
yeah, but it is come to the detriment of the game. But as I said, you know, it's cyclical, and hopefully we'll get into a different cycle. But I know you played under a guy with a huge amount of vision in Ireland, you know, and we had a little bit of a chat about him previously, Brian Ashton,
yeah,
who's
yeah.
been
Look,
involved
look,
with me in producing something called 11's Rugby, but you know, and a
right.
few others. But yeah, he's a
Yeah,
great.
look, yeah. Brian was bought in. Like when I was playing for Ireland, I played 6 years from '94 to 2000 with them, and almost every year we had a new coach. Um, Coaches comes with the territory, I suppose. That if the team doesn't do well, it's the coach will take 99.9% of the slack, and ultimately his job will be on the line. So Warren Ashton was one of those guys who was brought in, and we didn't know a huge amount about him, but I suppose he was visionary in his thought process. But that didn't suit Irish rugby at the time. I mean, he wanted Irish forwards to pass the ball and for backs to hit rucks, and that wasn't going to happen over here with our generation. I'm not saying that we couldn't do it, but it was almost, it was get the ball, it was head down, look for contact instead of look for space, and
Yeah.
play from there. We were very traditional in how we played the game. Forwards did the donkey work and the backs scored tries, and the backs with a dirty pair of shorts would be looked at or frowned upon over here. And if you, as I say, if a forward was caught passing the ball, especially to another forward, it was deemed a mortal sin. So we were. That's the way it was. And I suppose, I say, when Brian came in, he probably tried to change things too quickly. He had a fairly decent bunch of players in us. We were honest. We wouldn't have been at the same fitness level as the other players in the other countries. So that's just the way it was. You played in 5 nations back then. On a Saturday, you went back to work on a Monday. That's you had no choice. So Brian didn't really work out, and his style didn't work out, and there was a bit of rift in the management, and it became very visible to the players, and that's not a healthy environment to be playing international rugby in.
One of the things I love about you, David, is the fact that you're so incredibly honest, and whether it's about rugby, but also your honesty about what happened with yourself after you finished playing. And I refer to it as when the phone stops ringing, because I've been there myself, and it's difficult, especially if you've been at the top of your profession, whatever it is, whether you're playing, whether you're an administrator. I mean, I was the CEO of both New Zealand Rugby and Welsh Rugby, and I don't know if that'll ever happen again. It's happened as coaching, but not as an administrator, and that's a matter of huge pride to me. But I know that, immediately after I left Welsh Rugby, I sort of thought to myself, what the hell have I done? Because the phone just stops ringing. Yeah.
It is. It's a very good analogy to put out there. I suppose I describe it as a bubble. You're in a very unique bubble, a very honourable bubble, a very, it's a very privileged place to be, and you're exposed to the outside world, as I describe it. It can be a very lonely place. All your former teammates, who I would call as extended members of my family, go one direction, and you're left, I suppose, sitting at home, doing nothing, wondering where life is going to take you. So I was a bit unfortunate in terms of I ruptured both my Achilles, one within 6 months of the other. I had 5 compressed discs, dislocated both ankles, popped both shoulders, had 20 odd operations on my left knee alone. That was all up to the age of 27. So my body was really a car crash at that stage. And when my second Achilles went, that was it. I suppose mentally and physically, my goose was cooked. I was never going to get back to the level that I was playing at. There was younger guys knocking on the door all the time. Alan Quinlan, Anthony Foley was there, David Wallace. They were, Andy Ward. There were so many just knocking on the door waiting to come in, and they were fresh, young, vitalized. And here was me, injecting myself with 3-in-1 oil every day just so I could put one foot in front of the other. So ultimately, the injury took me from the game. And it was like going from day to night in the flick of a switch. 1 minute you're playing for Ireland, the next minute you're at home. You describe it, the phone doesn't ring, it stops ringing. Journalists stop ringing, coaches stop ringing, agents stop ringing, your fellow players stop ringing because they're on a different pathway. And, you put on this brave face and you try to chase the dressing room, as I describe it, because what happens in the dressing room with teammates is something that can never be replicated anywhere else in any other walk of life that you, in my opinion anyway, no matter what you try to, how to replicate it or get that feeling back, you can't, because there's nothing there. I continued coaching for about 15 years after, I suppose, almost searching for the same feeling, but it was never there. You get involved you try to get involved in warm-ups and even try to put the boots back on in charity games and stuff like that. But that competitive edge, the one that you crave so much and you long for and yearn for, to be sitting inside a dressing room with a bunch of lads with sweat and blood pouring out of you after the game, whether you've lost or drawn or won the game, it's something you can't replicate and you can almost touch it. And I was never able to find that. And I just, I became very depressed. Couldn't find myself, couldn't establish who I was, what I was. What I was a rugby player. That was now gone. So then you're known as from the rugby player to the former rugby player. And it hurts. It's sad. There was no help back then. There was no guidance counselors with the RFU, or there was no support system. You just got a letter from the RFU saying, thanks for your services, best of luck. You got your 2 tickets for every international home game that you had to pay for, and that's it. You're just left high and dry. And I just wasn't ready at 27 years of age. I didn't have an education behind me. I worked in various places. I stacked shelves in Tesco just to put food on the table for my kids. And I'm not saying that I was on the breadline or anything like that, but it was hard. It was very difficult. I saw people on the aisles in Tesco avoiding me because they were just embarrassed for me. And that was difficult. And look, I also lost my dad to suicide at the same time. So it was a combination of things that sent me over the edge. And, whilst I never got to the point where I said I'd take my own life, but I certainly thought that this world and my dependents would be better off if I wasn't in it. So it's sad and it's very selfish to say that, I wished I got cancer. I wished I got leukemia or was involved in an accident where the onus of responsibility would be taken from me. And that might sound very selfish and cowardly, but I'm not going to lie. Why should I lie? It is what it is, and that's what happened, and that's the way I felt. And I remember waking up during the night, 3 or 4 times, just absolutely drowned in sweat. Just the anxiety and the depression and the spiral. And I often describe it as a black dog that's always there, sitting in the corner, waiting to bark and waiting to attack. And I suppose through various means, you come up with methods of trying to keep that dog at bay and keep him quiet. And I've done well for the last couple of years, but it's always there, and I do have my moment.
With the help of your friend and mentor, Hugh O'Donovan, I believe, who's somebody that you just came across, and he's been of immense help to you.
Yeah, look, there's lots of, I suppose we all see it now, check on your neighbor, check on your teammate, you know, ask a simple question, how are you? And those 3 words basically changed my life and probably saved me. Very briefly, I'll run through the story. I was in Cork watching a match, and Hugh, who I knew to say hello to, just came up to me and asked me, how are you? Simple, out of the blue, just how are you? And I was a bit taken back by it, but we started talking and he started listening, which was probably the most important thing. And I do become very emotional at times, and he could almost see me welling up. And that day came and went, and a few weeks came and went, and a couple of weeks later I got a call from you. I didn't know who it was. It was a private number. I didn't really answer private numbers at that time because I just didn't want to speak to anyone. But I did for this particular reason. I don't know why. And it was Hugh. And he said, "Hi Dave, it's Hugh O'Donovan here." And I had to think, who the fuck is Hugh O'Donovan? I couldn't think it properly at the time. And eventually it came to me, and he said, "Look, would you do me a favor? Would you come out and have a cup of coffee with me in my house?" And again, I was a bit taken back by it. And I said, "Jesus, yeah, absolutely. Would love to, whatever." So I did. And later on, I found out then that you kind of lectured in lectures here in UCC in psychiatry and various other methods of mental health in helping people. And he runs an executive coaching service as well, where it's primarily all about listening and understanding and just being there for people. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just that, but and I think that 10-minute chat turned into a 3-hour life-changing conversation. And through just some simple advice, you set me straight. I took his advice. I followed his advice. I went and I saw my doctor. I've been on some medication ever since, and that helps hugely. And look, it's like if you have a headache, you take a Disprin or an aspirin. If you suffer from depression, you take a tablet. That's the way to look at it. There's no stigma attached to it. It is what it is. Yeah, yes, I was the big bad rugby player who thought I could beat this myself, but I couldn't, and I needed help, and I just didn't realize that until somebody basically sat me down, listened to me, and pointed me in the right direction. And that's how simple it was. And I went public with my story in an attempt to just help other people, because I couldn't fathom how easy it was for me to sort myself out to a certain degree by those 3 words, how are you? And not everybody will be as lucky as me to be asked those questions or asked those words. So, if you are feeling down, if you are feeling anxiety or a bit depressed, to this day, I still don't know really what depression means, but I'm just, when it does come, it's a low ebb, and people do have bad thoughts. So, there's no stigma attached. There's not anymore. It's not like it was in the 60s and 70s, and where there was a stigma attached to it.
No.
It's, the world is different. We live on a different planet completely, and some may say it's worse, some may say it's a better planet, especially with what's going on in the Ukraine and various places around the world. But look, it's a different world now, and just if you're feeling down, there's so much help out there. You'll be so surprised at how willing people are to help if you ask the question, if you ask it of them.
And I think that also people watching this will be impressed to know that that there is help out there, and those 3 simple words, how are you? We hear about them a lot. People are saying, just ring up somebody, a family, a friend, and say, how are you? And quite often they'll say, yeah, I'm okay, when they're actually not. And if you can't see their eyes, it's very difficult. You were very fortunate that those 3 words meant so much, and that Hugh Donovan must be a great guy. I've obviously never met him, but for him to have picked up on the pain that you were going through is just an amazing story. And it's and I've suffered from depression as well, and I've pretty much, that's behind me now. But there was some dark days. And of course,
Yeah.
you know, the people closest to you are often the ones that suffer because, you know,
Yeah,
it's easy to lash out at them. And quite often you don't even know you're doing it.
absolutely.
You know,
That, that is
so
so true. You know, that's what they all say, isn't it? The ones you love the most are the ones you hurt the most. And
yeah,
it's, you know, it has had a huge detrimental effect on my family life. And
yeah. So David, do you have you started a little movement or something like that, or are you part of one that
no,
looks?
uh, I wouldn't say a movement, but there is definitely a bigger understanding about mental health in this country. And there's lots of ads on telly, there's lots of posters around, there's people know that there are people out there. It's just that they're at the end of a phone call, but a lot of it is volunteer based, a lot of it is voluntary, a lot of it is, you know, these organizations have to fund themselves, which is, I think, is extremely sad, that our government doesn't get involved more. But you know, they'll fight their corner as well, and they'll say they have other stuff to worry about. But it is, I mean, the suicide rate in this country is ridiculous, with young males. And look, it's there, it's in females as well, but the young male suicide rate is unacceptable, and there really is no need for it, at this time. And as I say to you, you know, three little words: how are you? And I've been fortunate enough to, when I went public with my story, one or two schools got onto me and asked me would I speak to their students, especially their older kind of fifth year, sixth year, 16, 17, 18-year-old students. And I've done that on quite a few occasions. And yeah, it becomes very emotional, and you become very tied up because it unearths a lot of pain again.
Yeah,
But I think the effect that it's had on those kids, from the feedback that I've got, has been life changing. And if that's my if that's my mantra now and my one goal in life, then you know I can die successfully. If I've changed one of those students' lives,
yeah,
then I've done something good. And yeah, I mightn't be able to throw the ball around or run around or tackle like I used to, and never will be again. But you know, at least I found something else now that gives me a lot of joy, a lot of feeling of accomplishment. It used to be a little gold medal. Now it's probably helping somebody's life. So, and I don't, you know, sorry, Dave, no, sorry for interrupting you, but
no, no,
people say that, you know, oh geez, you're very brave for what you're doing. It's not. That's, you know, to me, that's not brave. I suppose the brave thing is people who are out there and they have, you know, the balls to step up and say, look, I need help. I wasn't brave enough to do that. You know, I was lucky enough. So,
well, David,
yeah,
you're a great man. I've only just met you, and I'm going to keep in touch with you, and you know, and hopefully when I can travel to the UK again, I'll pop across. I've never been to Cork, but I will definitely pop across and
yeah,
make your acquaintance and have a cup of coffee, because I'm sure that there's a lot still to learn about you, and a lot of things that you
yeah,
can teach a lot of people.
yeah.
And
Yourself, myself, and Hugh can sit down and have a cup of coffee.
yeah, absolutely, mate. So yeah, I wish you well, and also I wish Ireland well in the upcoming Rugby World Cup,
Yeah,
because you know it's the thing about the Irish, isn't it? The Irish always seem to have a little part of everyone's heart for
yeah,
whatever reason. You know, it's whether they believe they've got some Irish ancestry or whatever it is, but you know, there's always that huge respect for Ireland.
it's probably the Guinness.
The Guinness.
There's a bit of Guinness in everyone, I think, and if there's not, they want it to be in them. So
yeah, that's a good analogy, mate. Thank you very much, David, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you. Thank you.